Alright, let's go ahead and try to finish this.
So Glanton and the judge go to look for it, and the story says Glanton and the judge sought them out. A rude tent thrown up out of an old tarp. A sign that said, "See the wild man, 2 bits." They passed behind a wagon sheet where, within a crude cage of palavered poles, crouched a naked imbecile. The floor of the cage was littered with filth and trodden food, and flies clambered about everywhere. The idiot was small and misshapen, and his face was smeared with feces, and he sat peering at them with dull hostility, silently chewing a turd. Cloy steps out, and the two ask if he's the keeper of this thing, and Cloy says that he is. After some conversing, Glanton says that he'll take Cloyce and this wild man in a cage for $100. Cloy says that he'll get the money because he wants to make it to California, and as mentioned earlier, you can't travel by yourself. And on the way out, Glanton turns to him and says, "You let women see that thing?" And Cloyce says, "I don't know," said the owner. "There's none ever asked." So Cloyce just has a crazy person who is inside of a cage who it says is covered in his own filth and excrement, and he just takes people's money so they can look at him. A right fit for the Glanton gang. So Glanton and the judge join the rest of the gang, and they go to an eating house to get food. As they're sitting there, they're encountered by a problem that they haven't experienced a long time because it wasn't a problem in Mexico. Perhaps the owner of the restaurant, it says a man in a blood-stained apron walks up to them from out of the back and says, "Gentlemen," he said, "we don't mind serving people of color, glad to do it. But we asked for him to sit over here at this other table here, right over here." He stepped back and held out one hand in a strange gesture of hospice. His guests looked at one another. "What in the hell is he talking about?" "Just right over here," said the man. Tovine looked down the table to where Jackson sat. Several looked toward Glanton. His hands were at rest on the board in front of him, and his head was slightly bent like a man at grace. The judge sat smiling, his arms crossed. They were all slightly drunk. They sat in silence. The old woman in the court had commenced wailing some dolorous air, and the man was standing with his hand outheld. Piled just within the door were the satchels and holsters and the arms of the company. Glanton raised his head. He looked at the man. "What's your name?" he said. "Name's Owens. I own the place." "Mr. Owens, if you was anything at all other than a damn fool, you could take one look at these here men and know for a stone fact they ain't a one of them going to get up from where they're at to go sit somewhere else." "Well, I can't serve you." "Suit yourself about that. Ask her what she's got, Tommy." Harlan, one of the gang members, Harlan was sitting at the end of the table, and he leaned out and called to the old woman at her pots and asked her in Spanish what she had to eat. She looked toward the house. "Huesos," she said. "Huesos," said Harlan. "Tell her to bring him, Tommy." "She won't bring you nothing without I tell her to. I own this place." Harlan was calling out the open door. "I know for a fact that man yonder's a black man," said Owens. Jackson looked up at him. Brown turned toward the owner. "Have you got a gun?" he said. "A gun?" "A gun. Have you got a gun?" "Not on me, I ain't." Brown pulled a small 5-shot Colt from his belt and pitched it to him. He caught it and stood holding it uncertainly. "You got one now." "Now, shoot the black man." "Wait a minute," said Owens. "Shoot him," said Brown. Jackson had risen and he pulled one of the big pistols from his belt. Owens pointed the pistol at him. "You put that down," he said. "You better forget about giving orders and shoot the son of a bitch." "Put it down, man. Tell him to put it down. Shoot him." He cocked the pistol. Jackson fired. He simply passed his left hand over the top of the revolver he was holding in a gesture brief as a flint spark and tripped the hammer. The big pistol jumped, and a double handful of Owens' brains went out the back of his skull and plopped in the floor behind him. He sank without a sound and lay crumpled with his face in the floor and one eye open and the blood welling up out of the destruction of the back of his head. Jackson sat down. Brown rose and retrieved his pistol and let the hammer back down and put it in his belt. So they're at a bar, and the owner says that Jackson can't eat with them because he's black. So Brown's like, "All right, let's make it interesting." And he throws a gun to the owner. So in a duel, Jackson stands up and kills Owens. Immediately after this, Clouts, who's the lieutenant in Tucson, as mentioned, comes to Glanton and the men who are now drinking at a different establishment and says, "I'm sorry, Glanton, but I'm going to have to arrest whoever was responsible for the murder of Owens."
Yeah, you can't exactly get away with the murder when back home, can ya?
And Glanton's like, "What are you talking about?" And Clout says, "Well, you all walked into the bar and then there was a gunshot and now he's dead." And Glanton says, "Did you witness it? Do you have any witnesses of it?" And and Clout says no. And Glanton said, "Well, you can go ahead and ask the boys, but none of us were in there either." And through the judge finagling with Clouts, they get away with it because they're all sworn to secrecy towards each other. Again, their own sense of loyalty. Also in one of these bars, Glanton and the judge begin talking to Klaus about the nature of this wild man. It turns out that this wild man is Klaus's brother, who was just born that way. He says that he has taken this boy from town to town, and in every town he has been ridiculed, tarred and feathered. He had one town where they were convinced he was drugging the boy, so they jailed both of them for a while, and when the boy didn't get any better, they just released both of them and let them go about their way. So effectively, Klaus is a traveling showman, with the showman being his mentally ill brother. It's also mentioned that within the village that night, another child goes missing. And of course, as with every single town they go to, they get drunk that night and they go naked through the streets door to door, demanding for women and liquor to be brought out to them. So, their standard charming self. It's also said that the farrier in Tucson doesn't have an anvil to work with, and instead he has a meteorite that fell to the earth that weighs potentially hundreds of pounds. So, for a series of bets, the judge first picks it up, and then he picks it up above his head, and then he throws the meteor 10 feet. Again, attesting to the capabilities of this man. So as they leave Tucson, they go back to finish their deal with the Apaches. The deal was they would trade gold for a barrel of whiskey. So what Glanton does is he gets a barrel and he takes a sack, like a leather sack, and he ties it to the inside of where the spigot is located on the outside of the barrel. So there is enough whiskey in that sack for, a few cups full, but the rest of the barrel is filled with water. So he goes and he tricks the Apaches, gets the gold for the whole barrel's worth, and takes off. One of the new recruits who they got in Tucson rides up next to Brown and asks what will happen if the Apaches decide to retaliate. "They won't ride at night," said Brown. The recruit looked back at the figures gathered about the keg in that scoured and darkening waste. "Why won't they?" he said. Brown spat. "'Cause it's dark," he said. "Why won't they ride at night?" "I don't know, maybe because they can't see, idiot." During this time around the campfire, it says that Glanton is nearly broken. So many people dead, the members of the gang now aren't even the people that he started with. And he just sits there, staring, as the judge sits next to him, watching the idiot stare at the fire from his cage. Also, I'm not being mean calling him the idiot. That's what the story calls him for the rest of it, so you can take it up with the author. One night, the men are sitting around the fire, and someone asks the ex-priest if it's true that at one point in history, there were 2 moons in the night sky, which was a belief held by a few, groups of people at this time. The ex-priest says it was fully possible. Perhaps God put up 2 moons and then decided that humanity only needed 1. After that, someone asked the question of if there's life on other planets out there among the stars. The question was then put as to whether there were on Mars or other planets in the void men or creatures like them. And at this, the judge, who had returned to the fire and stood half naked and sweating, spoke and said that there were not, and that there were no men anywhere in the universe save those upon the earth. All listened as he spoke, those who had turned to watch him and those who would not. "The truth about the world," he said, "is that anything is possible. Have you not seen it all from birth, and thereby bled of its strangeness? It would appear to you for what it is: a hat trick in a medicine show, a fever dream, a trance bepopulate with chimeras having neither analog nor precedent, an itinerant carnival, a migratory tent show whose ultimate destination, after many a pitch in many a mudded field, is unspeakable and calamitous beyond reckoning. The universe is no narrow thing, and the order within it is not constrained by any latitude in its conception to repeat what exists in one part in any other part. Even in this world, more things exist without our knowledge than with it. And the order in creation which you see is that which you have put there, like a string in a maze, so that you shall not lose your way. For existence has its own order, and that no man's mind can compass. That mind itself being but a fact among others. The judge is saying, of course, there's life on other planets. There's no order, there's no repetition in the universe. It is entirely chaotic and changing in every instance humanity isn't looking. Why would we expect something as strange as life to happen anywhere else? Again, it falls back on the judge's belief that the world itself is without order unless we assign order to it. Brown spat into the fire. That's some of your craziness, he said. The judge smiled. He placed the palms of his hands upon his chest and breathed the night air, and he stepped closer and squatted and held up one hand. He turned that hand, and there was a gold coin between his fingers. Where's the coin, Davy? I'll notify you where to put the coin. The judge swung his hand, and the coin winked overhead in the firelight. It must have been fastened to some subtle lead, horsehair perhaps, for it circled the fire and returned to the judge, and he caught it in his hand and smiled. The arc of circling bodies is determined by the length of their tether, said the judge. Moons, coins, men. His hands moved as if he were pulling something from one fist in a series of elongations. Watch the coin, Davy, he said. He flung it, and it cut an arc through the firelight and was gone in the darkness beyond. They watched the night where it had vanished, and they watched the judge, and in their watching, some the one and some the other, they were a common witness. The coin, Davy, the coin, whispered the judge. He sat erect and raised his hand and smiled around. The coin returned back out of the night, crossed the fire with a faint high droning, and the judge's raised hand was empty, and then it held the coin. There was a light slap, and it held the coin. Even so, some claimed that he had thrown the coin away and palmed another like it, and made the sound with his tongue, for he was himself a cunning old Malabarista. And he said himself, as he put the coin away, what all men knew, that there are coins and false coins. In the morning, some did walk over the ground where the coin had gone, but if any man found it, and he kept it to himself, and with sunrise, they were mounted and riding again. So the judge is explaining that, the world is without order, but at the same time, humans are only destined to go so far. The coin can only move as far as the arc will allow it to. And much the same, people are kept to their own devices of their birth, of what they make of it. If you don't aspire to be anything greater, then you will never be something greater. The coin can never go farther than the horsehair allows. But then he does the magic trick where he throws the coin across the fire, and then another one appears in his hand. And you would think, oh, well, he just threw a coin and then pulled out another one, right? But it says the next day they all looked for it, and if anyone found it, they kept them to themselves. Again, another mysterious trait, almost supernatural, about the judge's character. It seems at this point in the game that Glanton has kind of given up on any greater hope or purpose, and the judge is just taking his run of the show, doing what he wants. And that's proven when a couple nights later, he's giving another of his sermons. And this sermon is by far his most famous, and perhaps the most famous segment of the entire book. Whenever I went into this story, I had several of my friends who had read it say, wait till you get to the part where the judge talks about this. It's one of the greatest monologues in fiction. And after reading it, I see the hype. They were gathered around, and the story says that the subject of their discussion was war. The good book says that he that lives by the sword shall perish by the sword, said the black. The judge smiled, his face shining with grease. What right man would have it any other way, he said. That line does go pretty hard. The good book does indeed count war as an evil, said Irving, yet there's many a bloody tale of war inside it. It makes no difference what men think of war, said the judge. War endures. As well, ask men what they think of stone. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way. He turned to Brown, for whom he'd heard some whispered slur or demurmur. Oh, Davy, he said, it's your own trade we honor here. Why not rather take a small bow? Let each acknowledge each. My trade? Certainly. What is my trade? War is your trade, is it not? And ain't it yours? Mine too, very much so. What about all them notebooks and bones and stuff? All other trades are contained in that of war. Is that why war endures? No. It endures because young men love it, and old men love it in them. Those that fought, those that did not. That's your notion. The judge smiled. Men are born for games, nothing else. Every child knows that play is nobler than work. He knows, too, that the worth or merit of a game is not inherent in the game itself, but rather in the value of that which is put at hazard. Games of chance require a wager to have meaning at all. Games of sport involve the skill and strength of the opponents, and the humiliation of defeat and the pride of victory are in themselves sufficient stake, because they inhere in the worth of the principles and define them. But trial of chance or trial of worth, all games aspire to the condition of war, for here that which is wagered swallows up game, player, all. Suppose 2 men at cards with nothing to wager save their lives. Who has not heard such a tale? A turn of the card. The whole universe for such a player has labor clanking to this moment, which will tell if he is to die at that man's hand or that man at his. What more certain validation of a man's worth could there be? This enhancement of the game to its ultimate state admits no argument concerning the notion of fate. The selection of one man over another is a preference absolute and irrevocable, and it is a dull man indeed who could reckon so profound a decision without agency or significance either one. In such games as have for their stake the annihilation of the defeated, the decisions are quite clear. This man holding this particular arrangement of cards in his hand is thereby removed from existence. This is the nature of war, whose stake is at once the game and the authority and the justification. Seeing so, war is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will, because it binds them, is therefore forced to select. War is the ultimate game because war is at last a forcing of the unity of existence. War is God. And for the first time in the story, it makes sense why a 7-foot-tall mountain of a man who is educated in matters of government, law, and art chooses to be in the middle of a rove of headhunters in the American Southwest. See, as the judge says, nothing in the world matters more than war. Nothing matters more than the conquest of one man over the other. If man was made to play games, then what greater game could there be than one where the risk is the very existence of man itself? What more noble or better cause is there to fight for than one that you die for? Or even better, one that you kill for. He's not out here killing people wildly in the desert because he loves it, although that is part of it. He's doing it because there's simply nothing else worth doing. Brown studied the judge. "You're crazy, Holden. Crazy at last." The judge smiled. "Might does not make right," said Irving. "The man that wins in some combat is not vindicated morally. Moral law is an invention of mankind for the disenfranchisement of the powerful in favor of the weak. Historical law subverts it at every turn. A moral view can never be proven right or wrong by any ultimate test. A man falling dead in a duel is not thought thereby to be proven in error as to his views. His very involvement in such a trial gives evidence of a new and broader view. The willingness of the principles to forego further argument as the triviality which it in fact is, and to petition directly the chambers of the historical absolute clearly indicates of how little movement are the opinions and of what great moment the divergences thereof. For the argument is indeed trivial, but not so the separate wills thereby made manifest. Man's vanity may well approach the infinite in capacity, but his knowledge remains imperfect, and however much he comes to value his judgments, ultimately he must submit them before a higher court. Here, there can be no special pleading. Here are considerations of equity and rectitude and moral right rendered void and without warrant, and here are the views of the litigants despised. Decisions of life and death, of what shall be and what shall not, beggar all question of right. And elections of these magnitudes are all lesser ones subsumed, moral, spiritual, natural. The judge searched out the circle for disputants. But what says the priest? He said. Tobin looked up. The priest does not say. The priest does not say, said the judge. Nile dissent. But the priest has said. For the priest has put by the robes of his craft and taken up the tools of that higher calling which all men honor. The priest also would be no God server, but a God himself. Tobin shook his head. You've a blasphemous tongue, Holden. And in truth, I was never a priest, but only a novitiate to the order. Journeyman priest or apprentice priest, said the judge. Men of God and men of war have strange affinities. I'll not second say you in your notion, said Tobin. Don't ask it. Ah, priest, said the judge. What could I ask of you that you've not already given? All that, as to say that morality, principles, all of that, to the judge, is meaningless. What is an opinion or a thought of how something should go when there is instead an arena of combat in which one lives and the other dies? That is the final decision maker. That is the only thing that matters in this world. Not any decry of God or virtues or life or love. Only death. The final absolute decision that is just and fair in every ruling. And he looks to the priest and he says, look at the priest. He's thrown off his robes and decided to be something greater. He has found the true religion, the religion of war. Not a God server, as the judge says, but a God himself. While everyone else in the gang, excluding the kid potentially, while everyone else in the gang is there as soldiers of fortune and willing to shed misery on others for the sake of profit, the judge is there because it's noble. Because murder, conquest, destroying any life in your path to be the one left standing, that is nobility. That is honor. That is something to be praised. So as the others are there for money and for the women and the booze, the judge is there because it feels good, because it's supposed to feel good. Because if war, if death, if murder is the highest calling a human can aspire towards, then what other call might a man or a king have than mass bloodshed? A few days later, the gang makes it to the Colorado River. And when they get there, they see that the ferry across the river is being ran by a man named Lincoln. So the gang begins to conspire as another way to make money off of these people. The Yuma Indians who are nearby have been thinking about attacking Lincoln and the ferry. So the gang goes to the Yumas and say that they'll be happy to help them attack the ferry. They then go to Lincoln and say that any day now, the Yumas are probably going to attack, and it's in Lincoln's best interest to let the gang set up fortifications, to which Lincoln agrees. Also, in the midst of this, a woman who is traveling on the ferry sees Cloyce and his deranged brother in a cage, and she scolds him for being a bad brother and for, locking up your mentally ill brother and putting him on a cage to sell shows to. So she asks Cloyce what the idiot's name is, and he says that his name is James. So the woman takes James to the river, and her and several other women clean him off and set his carriage on fire. That night, the idiot gets up from camp and walks into the river by himself and nearly drowns. But he stopped whenever the judge, who is walking alongside the river, sees him drowning and wades into the river to pull him out. The relationship between the judge and the idiot, as he's called, or James, is weird. Typically, the judge despises all life and, everything around him that lives that, is without his permission or whatever. But he not really cares. He keeps the idiot alive and keeps him around for here and, some parts of the story moving forward. And I don't know if it's because he's interested in him as a specimen, if he likes the idiot, or if he likes, I keep saying idiot because that's what the story calls him, if he likes James, it's a little mean, if he likes James because James bends to his will, perhaps, but for some reason, he seems to have a soft spot for him, even though he's, insane and can't talk, which is probably the aspect that the judge likes about him. So once all the pieces are in play, the day of the Yuma attack comes. Another thing that I should mention is that one of the goods Lincoln, the guy who ran the ferry, had in his possession was a 12-pound howitzer cannon. The gang decides to set it up to prepare for the advancing Yumas. They get up on a cliffside where they can oversee the other bank of the ferry, and as soon as the Yumas launch their attack, they light off the cannon, killing a dozen Yumas with grape shot out of the cannon all at once. The Yumas begin to scream and shout, calling them traitors and monsters, and the gang ignores their cries and guns them down on the side of the Colorado River. Something interesting to note is that after the gang kills the Yumas, they start scalping them. This is weird because the gang can't sell the scalps anymore. It seems that they're doing it just out of tradition or love of the kill. After they do this, Lincoln decides to not try to hinder the men in their future endeavors because, the last guys that tried got blown up by a cannon. So Lincoln effectively just lets Glanton run the show. And that goes exactly as you'd expect. Glanton took charge of the operation of the ferry. People who had been waiting 3 days to cross at $1 a head were now told that the fare was $4. And even this tariff was in effect for no more than a few days. Soon they were operating a sort of pro-Christian ferry where the fares were tailored to accommodate the purses of the travelers. Ultimately, all pretense was dropped and the immigrants were robbed outright. Travelers were beaten and their arms and goods appropriated, and they were sent destitute and beggared into the desert. The doctor came down to remonstrate with them and was paid his share of the revenues and sent back. Horses were taken and women violated, and bodies began to drift past the Yuma camp downriver. As these outrages multiplied, the doctor barricaded himself in his quarters and was seen no more. So Glanton figures, hey, since we lost that whole gimmick we had going with the selling native scalps thing, what if we just rob people? Just a good old-fashioned American robbery. One day, a group of American soldiers show up to cross the river, and after seeing that Glanton is just an animal, they decide not to work with him, so they build their own ferry further down the river. After the soldiers leave, the ferry becomes an alternate route of travel compared to Glanton's ferry. The ferry down the river being operated by the Yumas and white men working with the Yumas. So how does the gang respond to this? Easy, they kill everyone there and set the ferry on fire. By now, Glanton had enslaved a number of Sonorans, and he kept crews of them working at the fortification of the hill. There were also detained in the camp a dozen or more Indian and Mexican girls, some little more than children. Glanton supervised with some interest the raising of the walls about him, but otherwise left his men to pursue the business at the crossing with a terrible attitude. He seemed to take little account of the wealth they were amassing, although daily he'd open the brass lock with which the wood and leather trunk in his quarters was secured and raise the lid and empty whole sacks of valuables into it. The trunk already holding thousands of dollars in gold and silver coins, as well as jewelry, watches, pistols, raw gold, little leather staves, silver and bars, knives, silverware, plate, teeth. So at this point, rather than just roaming the countryside, they decide to build a little castle here at the edge of the ferry and just rob anyone who tries to get across the Colorado River. Glanton just a dragon sitting on top of his horde. No need to journey into the world or be anything better. Eventually, they need building supplies, so Glanton sends Toadvine, David Brown, and Webster to the city of San Diego to get the supplies they need. It's about a 5-day journey, and when the three get there, they go to the store to order the parts they need, and then immediately go on a bender. The next day, David Brown wakes up in an alley with the gang's money tied around his neck, and he can't find Toadvine or Webster anywhere. Turns out, the two of them got arrested for their drunken endeavors the night before. San Diego isn't like these small towns in the middle of Mexico that you can just torment all you want. They have, police and jails that will do something about it. Brown goes to the alcalde, which is effectively like a judge or sheriff of the town, and asks for his two friends to be let out, but the alcalde tells him to get lost, so Brown concerns himself with other things. Brown goes to a farrier and demands to have a double-barreled shotgun cut down, but by the description, the shotgun is so beautiful that the farrier says he's not going to saw the barrel because that would be a disgrace to the weapon. Brown eventually tells the farrier that if the farrier doesn't saw down the shotgun barrels, that Brown will kill him. So the farrier goes to get the police, and as he does, Brown just hops the counter and uses the farrier's tools to saw off the shotgun barrel. And then when the police show up, they were like, Did you threaten to injure this man? And Brow said, no, I didn't threaten anything. It was a promise. I promised to kill him. The gang is unfit for any manner of civilized or polite living, as you could probably imagine. The next day, Webster and Toadvine get out of jail. So how do the men celebrate? With another bender, of course. This night, however, as the men are walking out of the bar drunk, Brown sees a peace officer or police officer walking by, and Brown thinks it would be funny to pour a pitcher of aguardiente, I believe that's how it's pronounced on him, effectively a very strong alcohol. And then he puffs his cigar and holds it to the officer. And sure enough, the officer burst into flames. Only instead of a funny joke, the man began to scream and tear at himself until eventually he burned to death and lay dead in the street. Of course, because of this, Brown was arrested. One night, an officer comes to Brown in his jail cell, and while he's standing there, Brown shows him the necklace of ears that he has on his neck. It's implied that Brown took the necklace from Bathcat after Bathcat died. And he begins to tell this young officer that he is a part of a gang that has tons and tons of gold and riches amassed in the hills outside of San Diego. After nights of convincing, eventually this officer agrees to help Brown escape if Brown takes him to the money. So the two of them escape into the night, and it says 2 nights in, as they're setting up camp, Brown walks behind the officer who helped free him and shoots him in the back of the head, stealing what little gear he had and then leaving to head back towards the ferry. In the meantime,
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's why you don't get blinded by greed.
all of this was going on. Webster and Toadvine, as soon as Brown had been arrested, ran back to the ferry to tell Glanton. So Glanton, seeing that one of the gang members has been trapped, gets a couple more men, and all of them ride to San Diego. Before he leaves, Glanton leaves the judge in charge of the ferry and the castle they're building next to the ferry. It seems that in the beginning they were just building fortifications around the office of the ferry, but at this point it's a full-blown murder castle. In the middle of the night, Glanton and some of his men make it to the alcalde's house, break into his house, and then tie him and his wife up and throw a noose over the rafters and begin to hang the alcalde in front of his wife until he tells them where David Brown went. The alcalde says to go check the jail cell. There's no one in there. And sure enough, Glanton walks in and the cell's empty. Because, as we know, David Brown had escaped with the officer during this time. So they take the alcalde and his wife out of town, and it says that they're found 8 days later, still alive, but tied up in a hut south of San Diego. So Glanton's like, well, it seems that we came all this way to get Brown and he's not here, so time for a party. And after 2 nights of partying, the police threaten to arrest him, so Glanton and his men scatter. Glanton eventually makes it back to the ferry by himself. Whenever he gets close, he's met by travelers who are heading the opposite direction of him, who are yelling at him not to go to the river because the only people there is a band of thieves and murderers. Glanton, being the king of these murderers, ignores them and keeps walking back to the ferry. However, when Glanton gets back to the ferry, keep in mind it had been probably a couple weeks at this point, something's changed. A young Mexican girl was crouched naked under the shade of the wall. She watched him ride past, covering her breast with her hands. She wore a rawhide collar about her neck, and she was chained to a post, and there was a clay bowl of blackened meat scraps beside her. Glanton tied the jacks to the post and rode inside on the horse. There was no one about. He rode down to the landing. While he was watching the river, the doctor came scrambling down the bank and seized Glanton by the foot. The doctor is Lincoln, by the way, the previous owner of the ferry. So, forgot to mention that. Seized Glanton by the foot and began to plead with him in a senseless jabber. He'd not seen to his person in weeks, and he was filthy and disheveled, and he tugged on Glanton's trouser leg and pointed toward the fortifications on the hill. "That man," he said, "that man." Glanton slid his boot from the stirrup and pushed the doctor away with his foot and turned the horse and rode back up the hill. The judge was standing on the rise in silhouette against the evening sun like some great Baldwin archimandrite. He was wrapped in a mantle of free-flowing cloth beneath which he was naked. The black man Jackson came out of one of the stone bunkers dressed in a similar garb and stood beside him. Glanton rode back up along the crest of the hill to his quarters. He shows up, and a few weeks ago, he told the judge, "You're in charge of this place for a while." And he gets back, and everyone is terrified and screaming. There's young children with collars on their necks, and the judge is standing naked in like a kingly robe on top of the mountain, with Jackson standing in a similar robe right next to him. He has become the totalitarian warlord that he's always wanted to be. That night, it says that there's gunfire and partying and screaming, and Glanton lies asleep and drunk in his quarters. Early in the next morning, Jackson goes down to the river to pee, and while he's standing there, the story says, the sun was not up, and there was a low skein of mist on the water. Downstream, some ducks moved out from the willows. They circled in the eddy water and then flapped out across the open river, rose and circled and bent their way upstream. In the floor of the scow, the boat that Jackson is standing in the floor of the scow was a small coin, perhaps once lodged under the tongue of some passenger. He bent to fetch it. He stood up and wiped the grit from the piece and held it up, and as he did so, a long cane arrow passed through his upper abdomen and flew on and fell far out in the river and sank back to the surface again and began to turn and to drift downstream. He faced around, his robe sustained about him. He was holding his wound, and with his other hand, he ravaged among his clothes for the weapons that were not there and were not there. A second arrow passed him on the left, and two more struck and lodged fast in his chest and in his groin. They were a full 4 feet in length, and they lofted slightly with his movements like ceremonial wands, and he seized his thigh where the dark arterial blood was spurting along the shaft and took a step toward the shore and fell sideways into the river. Jackson was standing at the shore, and sure enough, the Yumas came back for their revenge. They killed Jackson and then immediately make their way towards the rest of the camp. They swarmed up the hill toward the fortifications where the Americans lay sleeping, and some were mounted and some afoot, and all of them armed with bows and clubs, and their faces blackened or pale with fard, and their hair bound up in clay. The first quarters they entered were Lincoln's. When they emerged a few minutes later, one of them carried the doctor's dripping head by the hair, and others were dragging behind them the doctor's dog, bound at the muzzle, jerking and bucking across the dry clay of the concourse. They entered a wickiup of willow poles and canvas and slew Gunn and Wilson and Henderson Smith, each in turn, as they reared up drunkenly, and they moved on among the rude half-walls in total silence, glistening with paint and grease and blood among the bands of light where the risen sun now touched the higher ground. When they entered Glanton's chamber, he lurched upright and glared wildly about him. The small clay room he occupied was entirely filled with a brass bed he'd appropriated from some migrating family, and he sat in it like a debauched feudal baron, while his weapons hung in a rich array from the finials. Caballo and Pelo mounted into the actual bed with him and stood there, while one of the attending tribunal handed him at his right side a common axe, the hickory helve of which was carved with pagan motifs and tasseled with the feathers of predatory birds. Glanton spat. "Hack away, you mean red," he said, and the old man raised the axe and split the head of John Joel Glanton to the thrapple. The Yumas came in, and they not only killed Jackson and several members, but they killed Glanton. They snuck in while he was in a drunken stupor, jumped on his bed, and cut his head all the way to the throat, clean in half. The man who lived by violence, who lived by the rule and law of violence, died in much the same way, with his last moments swearing and cursing the men who were about to do it, and challenging them to the task of killing him, of which it seems they obliged. Remember how back around the campfire, whenever the fortune teller was telling their stories, the card that Glanton drew was a man on a ferry riding into the night, and the woman gave a description of his fortune as being that of death and misery by this man at the helm of a ferry. And it seems that Glanton, who had absolutely nothing going for him at any point in his life, but now not even a pretend purpose or a fake purpose, he just sat on top of a pile of gold and waited to take in more. He was nothing. And this dog that had been running his whole life, hurting anyone who came in his way, stopped running long enough to finally get caught. And with that, Glanton dies. And as we're going to see, so does the Glanton gang.
Good riddance.
Now, if you thought that was crazy, the Yuma showing up and killing Glanton, wait till they get to the judge's quarters. When they entered the judge's quarters, they found the idiot and a girl of perhaps 12 years cowering naked in the floor. Behind them, also naked, stood the judge. He was holding leveled at them the bronze barrel of the howitzer. The wooden truck stood in the floor, the straps pried up and twisted off the pillow blocks. The judge had the cannon under one arm, and he was holding a lighted cigar over the touch hole. The Yumas fell over one another backward, and the judge put the cigar in his mouth and took up his portmanteau and stepped out the door and backed past them and down the embankment. The idiot, who reached just to his waist, stuck close to his side, and together they entered the wood at the base of the hill and disappeared from sight. We'll talk about what was happening in the judge's room in a moment, but the judge, picking up this giant cannon and holding a cigar to the touch hole ready to fire it at them, just walks out of the castle and backs into the woods because no one's going to mess with a guy who is just holding a cannon. So the judge and the idiot make it out, but other than them, nearly every member of the Glanton gang died right here. This actually lines up with the historical account. It's reasonable if you forgot at this point.
Mm. Yeah, that's what I was wanting to know as well, how accurate it is to the history.
But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Glanton gang is based on a real-life gang, who, according to Samuel Chamberlain, was mostly wiped out by an attack from the Yuma tribe. There is a very brutal depiction of the Yumas burning the bodies of everyone that they killed, and then throwing the men's living animals onto the fire to burn with them. Every trace of what the Glanton gang was is now eradicated from the earth, with only the few survivors who managed to get away being the witnesses that not only it existed, but of what they did and the atrocities they had committed. Earlier in the story, it was mentioned around the Anasazi and the people who built with stones, who overwhelm the people who build with mud and rocks. But what does that say of men like Glanton, men who built with nothing, who built nothing at all in their entire lives that stood the test of time? If it were not for the witnesses and the account of this story, Glanton himself would be forgotten to time far faster than those who he attempted to kill for his own personal gain. So I'll go ahead and spoil it for you. Out of every member of the Glanton gang, there are only 5 survivors. The judge and the idiot, as mentioned earlier when they backed into the woods, the kid and Toadvine, and the ex-priest Tobin. Those are our only 5 survivors of this entire massacre. Well, there's 6 survivors if you count David Brown, who's still on his way back from killing the officer who helped him escape from jail. The 5 people survived the massacre, and 6 of the gang is alive in total. The story then cuts to Toadvine and the kid, who are limping out of the woods, getting away from the castle. I keep calling it a castle. I think it's more accurately like a fortification, but castle sounds cooler. As they're running away, the kid is limping because he caught an arrow in the leg, and it's making it hard for him to run. "Can you walk?" said Toadvine. "I ain't got no choice." "How much water you got?" "Not much." "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." "We could ease back to the river and lay up," said Toadvine. "Till what?" He looked toward the fort again, and he looked at the broken shaft in the kid's leg and the welling blood. "You want to try and pull that?" "No." "What do you want to do?" "Go on." Similar to how at several points in the story, the kid wouldn't leave men that he was with even in dire straits, right here, Toadvine won't leave him. It's wild to look at this scene and think that the story began with the 2 of them ready to kill each other in the mud because...
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing, how third or Toadvine is still there. You wouldn't think he would have lived this long, but yeah.
They were walking on planks in the rain, and now standing here running away from their burning empire and the ashes of it, being chased for dear life, Toadvine won't leave that kid. As they make it to a clearing, several of the Yumas are closing
Yeah, that makes sense.
in on them. So the kid spins to the ground and pulls his pistol and begins to fire at them slowly, one at a time, eventually dropping all of their pursuers. The attack was quick and swift, and the men didn't think to grab all of their gear and equipment. So they're pretty much on foot, and the only weapon they have is the pistol that the kid is using. They make it to a well that's up ahead in the clearing, And whenever they get there, Tobin is already at the well. "How many are you?" he said. "What you see," said Toadvine. "All the rest gone under? Glanton, the judge?" They didn't answer. They slid down to the floor of the well, where they stood a few inches of water, and they knelt and drank. As they're sitting there, more of the Yumas attack. So the kid lays up in the tree line and once again begins to shoot them as they arrive. Seemingly, the Yumas think that there's far more of them than there is of the Yumas, even though it's just one kid shooting back. So the Yumas begin to retreat, and for a moment, the three of them can rest. As they're resting there, Tobin asks how much ammo they got, and the kid says not much, only a few shots. Near sunset, as the three men are standing there, they see two figures walking up on them in the distance. The kid looks and cocks his gun to see who it might be, and sure enough, it was the judge and the imbecile. They were both of them naked, and they neared through the desert dawn like beings of a mode little more than tangential to the world at large. Their figures now quick with clarity, and now fugitive in the strangeness of the same light. Like things whose very portent renders them ambiguous, like things so charged with meaning that their forms are dimmed. The three at the well watched mutely this transit out of the breaking day, and even though there was no longer any question as to what it was that approached, yet none would name it, they lumbered on. The judge a pale pink beneath his talk of dust, like something newly born. The imbecile much the darker, lurching together across the pan at the very extremes of exile, like some scurrilous king stripped of his vestiture and driven together with his fool into the wilderness to die. Man, McCarthy's got such a way with words. So as the judge makes his way to the rest of the men, one of maybe the most impressive moments in not only this book, but any book I've ever read, happens all at once. As I've explained it, I probably haven't done a great job at pointing out the subtlety with which a lot of the information I've shown you has been delivered. Like, I have highlighted the parts that I find to be important for an analysis of the story. I've read sections about the judge's declaration of war and things like the missing children, but keep in mind, everything I've told you about is strewn together with dozens of accounts of blood and death and murder and every other atrocity humanity is capable of committing. So while I'm cherry picking them to show you, everything that I talk about is muddled under this web of awful things. And what's so interesting about this story is it does an incredible job of convincing you that some things are simultaneously important and unimportant. It culminates in the scene that follows, where Toadvine is standing in front of the judge, and the judge is asking to buy Toadvine's hat because the judge is pale and being sunburned. Eventually, Toadvine asks for $125, and the judge agrees. And as this entire thing is happening, Tobin and the kid are standing at the edge of the well, several feet back from the judge, just glaring at him. And it was as I was reading that I almost supernaturally came to the same conclusion they were in real time as they were. The judge has always been this figure who exists not in the background necessarily, but as a constant within everything the gang does. Glanton may have been the leader, but the judge has certainly been a driving force in the gang's actions. And in this moment, where the three of the men who were sitting around the well barely got out of the attack from the Yumas with their lives, we have the judge who comes up, and it's in that moment I realized the judge certainly has a knack for getting out of troubling situations. We've seen time and time again that the gang instruments scenarios to get their best outcome. If it's either killing the Apaches for money or making a deal with them to get more money. I mean, we saw that very recently with Glanton making a deal with both the Yumas and Lincoln, and in the end, double-crossing both. So don't you think it's a little suspicious that in this attack by the Yumas, the judge just so happened to be standing there with a cannon he dragged off of the mountaintop and into his quarters for just such an occasion? See, we have the judge's philosophy laid out in plain ink. He believes that war and murder is the most righteous and meaningful conquest that a man can aspire towards. So how do you think that guy felt when his gang leader decided to stop doing that and instead just rob people who come to the river? The night that Glanton comes back and the night they all have a massive party and are drunk and hungover, that is the day that the Yumas attack. I think that the judge orchestrated all of this. And I think that he decided if he wasn't going to get his murder and bloodshed with Glanton, then he'd simply get Glanton out of the picture. And of course, the judge wouldn't just leave the gang. As we saw at several points in the story, if there's one thing that he does have valor in, it's the gang sticks together. And to him, Glanton left that narrative. So there's only one solution for deserters. Even though it's never said in the text, I picked up on what Tobin and the kid were picking up on, that it's really convenient Glanton managed to back out of all of that completely naked through the woods, and now, in spite of everyone that he has known for years being dead at the side of the river, he's arguing with Toadvine about a hat. And this level of tension that exists between the judge and every other person in the world starts to make itself known. The judge wiped his mouth and looked at the figures above him. "How are you fixed for weapons?" he said. The kid had set one foot over the edge of the pit, and now he drew it back. Tobin did not move. He was watching the judge. "We've just the one pistol, Holden." "We," said the judge. "The lad here." The kid had risen to his feet again. The ex-priest stood by him. The judge on the floor of the well likewise rose, and he adjusted his hat and gripped the valise under his arm like some immense and naked barrister whom the country had crazed. "Weigh your counsel, priest," he said. "We are all here together. Yonder sun is like the eye of God, and we will cook impartially upon this great salacious griddle, I do assure you." "I am no priest and I've no counsel," said Tobin. "The lad is a free agent." The judge smiled. "Quite so," he said. He looked at Toadvine and he smiled up at the ex-priest again. "What then?" he said. "Are we to drink at these holes turnabout like rival bands of apes?" The ex-priest looked at the kid. They stood facing the sun. He squatted, the better to address the judge below. "Do you think that there is a registry where you can file on the wells of the desert?" "Ah, priest, you know those offices more readily than I. I've no claim here. I've told you before, I'm a simple man. You know you're welcome to come down here and to drink and to fill your flask." Tobin didn't move. "Let me have the canteen," said the kid. He'd taken the pistol from his belt and he handed it to the ex-priest and took the leather bottle and descended the bank. There is a palpable tension between the men at the well. The judge is telling Tobin and the kid that they can just come down to the water and drink to their fill, and there's no need to worry. And the kid, who is openly cautious of him now, hands his gun to Tobin before he goes down to the water to fill his canteen. That way the judge can't try to attack him and just take the gun. Because if the judge gets a hold of you, there's nothing you can do to fight back. Eventually, the kid fills the canteen with water, and as he backs away from the well, he looks at Toadvine and says, "Are you going with us?" Toadvine looked at the judge. "I don't know," he said. "I'm subject to arrest. They'll arrest me in California." "Arrest you?" Toadvine didn't answer. He was sitting in the sand, and he made a tripod of 3 fingers and stuck them in the sand before him, and then he lifted and turned them and poked them in again so that there were 6 holes in the form of a star or a hexagon, and then he rubbed them out again. He looked up. "You wouldn't think that a man run plumb out of country out here, would you?" The kid rose and slung the flask by its strap over his shoulder. His trouser leg was black with blood, and the bloody stump of the shaft jutted from his thigh like a peg for hanging implements upon. He spat and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and he looked at Toadvine. "It ain't country you've run out of," he said. Then he made his way across the sink and up the bank. The judge followed him with his eyes, and when the kid reached the sunlight at the top, he turned and looked back, and the judge was holding open the satchel between his naked thighs. $500, he said, powder and ball included. The ex-priest was at the kid's side. "Do him," he hissed. The kid took the pistol, but the ex-priest clung to his arm, whispering, and when the kid pulled away, he spoke aloud. Such was his fear. "You'll get no second chance, lad. Do it. He is naked. He is unarmed. God's blood. Do you think you'll best him any other way? Do it, lad. Do it for the love of God. Do it, or I swear your life is forfeit." The judge smiled. He tapped his temple. "The priest," he said. "The priest has been too long in the sun. 75, and that's my best offer. It's a seller's market. The kid put the pistol in his belt. Then, with the ex-priest at his elbow, importunate, he circled the crater and they set out west across the pan. Toadvine climbed up and watched them. After a while, there was nothing to see. This is the breaking point for a lot of characters and a lot of tension that's been building through the story. There's been these brief mentions by Tobin, the ex-priest. Whenever the kid mentions the judge out loud, or whenever the kid goes to help the judge, it seems Tobin is trying to protect him from something. He's trying to keep the kid away from him. And in this moment, that all culminates. See, this is the part of the story that even people who are really big fans of the story find controversial because it's never outright said. But I think it's pretty well applied or implied, especially because of the historical aspect of this. So, believe it or not, as I mentioned earlier, the Glanton gang is based on a real gang that was recorded by Samuel Chamberlain. And on top of that, Judge Holden, the judge, seems to be a real person, at least according to Chamberlain's report. In his book, My Confession, which again is about Samuel Chamberlain's time with the Glanton gang, Chamberlain in one section says this: "The second in command, now left in charge of the camp, was a man of gigantic size called Judge Holden of Texas. Who or what he was, no one knew, but a cooler-blooded villain never went unhung. He stood 6 feet 6 in his moccasins, had a large, fleshy frame, a dull tallow-colored face destitute of hair and all expression." While he's described here as being very tall and large, terms like dull tallow just mean he was kind of pale. And the phrase hairless is a phrase that was used back then, or a word that was used back then, to describe men who didn't have facial hair. So Chamberlain isn't saying that the judge was a albino man with alopecia, that there's no hair on his body. Instead, he's just saying that he's a pale guy who's clean shaven. But in McCarthy's rendition, he takes that to the extreme limits and makes him a completely hairless man who's also albino, further to mystify this portrayal of the character. Chamberlain continues his account and says, "Holden was by far the best educated man in northern Mexico. He conversed with all in their own language, spoke in several Indian lingos. At a fandango, would take the harp or the guitar from the hands of the musicians and charm all with his wonderful performance and outwaltz any poblana of the ball. He was plumb sinner with a rifle or revolver, a daring horseman, acquainted with the nature of all the strange plants and their botanical names, great in geology and mineralogy, in short, another admirable Crichton, and withal an arrant coward. Not but that he possessed enough courage to fight the Indians and Mexicans or anyone else where he had the advantage in strength, skill, and weapons. But where the combat would be equal, he would avoid it if possible. I hated him at first sight, and he knew it. Yet nothing could be more gentle and kind than his deportment towards me. He would often seek conversation with me and speak of Massachusetts, and to my astonishment, I found that he knew more about Boston than I did." For one, it's insane to think that Judge Holden was perhaps a real person, someone who was versed in art and language.
Yeah, I gotta say, that's just crazy. I figured that the skit was completely fictional. Especially considering how just fantastical this portrayal is.
And politics, who was out among these killers, these monsters, hunting the countryside for native scalps, and eventually Mexican scalps and anyone who has dark hair. That's something that actually comes from the historical record as well. But you already knew all of that as related to the story, right? You knew all of the stuff about him being a master of the arts and a guitarist and what have you. So why am I bringing this up now? Well, I'm bringing this up now because there's a portion of Chamberlain's account I skipped over that I wanted to save now because this is the part that's relevant. While continuing his story about Judge Holden, Chamberlain says this: "His desires was blood and women, and terrible stories were circulated in camp of horrid crimes committed by him when bearing another name in the Cherokee Nation and Texas, and before we left Frontieras, a little girl of 10 years was found in the chaparral, foully violated and murdered. The mark of a huge hand on her little throat pointed him out as the ravisher, as no other man had such a hand. But though all suspected, no one charged him with the crime. So it seems that both the historic Judge Holden, as well as the Judge Holden of this story, is a serial child predator. All those mentions that I brought up of wherever the gang went, there would be children found naked and bloody, crushed to death. It's hard to explain whenever you read the story through normally, but you don't instantly connect all the dots. See, again, there's so many mentions of murder and descriptions of carcasses that are found horrifically mutilated and all manner of atrocities against people. But everywhere the gang goes, there is this continuous wrapping of children being found either dead, like the boy who was inside of the house with the vagrants, who it says he was naked and found dead in one of the cubicles. There's the mentions of the cities they go to whenever they're out on the bender, and they find the either remains or just the clothes of little girls who go missing. And then there's things like the judge holding candy out to kids who are passing on the street, trying to hand it off to them, but all of them being too afraid of him. Or that mention, whenever the judge walks out of the fortress holding the cannon under his arm, that he was completely naked and there was a naked child in the room with him as well. And it seems that everyone else in the gang is aware of this. Remember that line I pointed out earlier, whenever they are in that office building, or like the cubicles, the place where the 5 vagrants were staying with the horse that had its face bit by a snake, that whole thing. Whenever they get in there, the judge looks at the boy and asks, "Whose is it?" And the men say they don't know, and it says that Glanton spits and shakes his head. When I initially read that through, I thought that was Glanton shaking his head at the concept of this child being orphaned. But what it seems it actually was is that Glanton knew what the judge's intentions were with that child. It seems that a lot of men knew, and they just never said anything about it. Tobin constantly trying to keep the kid back from the judge time and time again. And it seems that throughout the story, not with everyone else, because everyone else in this gang might as well be, child murdering savages anyway, but whatever little part of religion or morality or sanctity is left inside of Tobin, no matter how small, it seems that now, standing between the kid and the judge, that piece of him ignites. And standing there, even though there is no evidence, the story has not said anything explicitly that Judge is responsible of those crimes or that he planned the massacre of Glanton and most of the gang, in that moment it snaps for Tobin and he yells to the kid, shoot him now. Your soul will be forfeit if you don't. And again, it's really hard to explain how well this story puts it together. Even though nothing is ever said about it, the moment that Tobin yells that, you know exactly why he's saying it. You connect the pieces at the same rate the characters do, or more specifically, at the same rate the kid does. And then that final conversation between the kid and Toadvine, where the kid asks Toadvine if he's going to come with him, and Toadvine says, "I'll be arrested in California. You wouldn't figure a man could run out of country out here." And the kid says, "It ain't country you've run out of." Oh, it's so good. Toadvine, perhaps none the wiser to what's going on, or perhaps just willing to accept whatever fate lies in front of him, decides to stick behind with the judge until Tobin and the kid leave. And it's almost, it's like the kid and Tobin, because Toadvine won't come with him, it's like they're leaving Toadvine to a monster, like a lion. They're leaving him in the lion's den as they slowly back out. And I'll go ahead and tell you, this is the last time that they ever see Toadvine alive. They see him sitting there with the judge at the well, they walk away, and the kid never speaks to Toadvine again. So as Tobin and the kid are walking away, who do they run into but David Brown, who is still riding back from his jail escape in San Diego. Again, Brown has no idea of anything that's happened. The two walk up to Brown and say, "We heard you were in the Just Gatos," said Tobin. "I was," said Brown. "I ain't now." His eyes cataloged them in every part. He looked at the piece of arrow shaft protruding from the kid's leg, and he looked into the ex-priest's eyes. "Where's your outfits?" he said. "You're looking at him. You fall out with Glanton?" "Glanton's dead." Brown spat a dry white spot in the vast and broken plateland. He had a small stone in his mouth against the thirst, and he shifted it with his jaw and looked at them. "The Yumas?" he said. "Aye," said the ex-priest. "All rubbed out?" "Toadvine and the judge are at the well back yonder." "The judge," said Brown. The horses stared bleakly at the crazed stone floor whereon they stood. "The rest gone under? Smith, Dorsey, the black man?" "All," said Tobin. Brown looked east across the desert. "How far to the well?" "We left about an hour past daybreak." "Is he armed?" "He is not." He studied their faces. "The priests don't lie," he said. No one spoke. He sat fingering the scapular of dried ears, and then he turned the horse and rode on, leading the riderless animal behind. He rode watching back at them, then he stopped again. "Did you see him dead?" he called. "Glanton?" "I did," called the ex-priest, "for he had so." He rode on, turned slightly in the saddle, the rifle on his knee. He kept watch behind him on those pilgrims and they on him. When he was well diminished on the pan, they turned and went on. It's like Brown coming back and hearing that the judge is alive. The first thing he asks is the judge unarmed? It's like everyone knew that the judge had always been on a leash. Under his own will, he had decided to be tame compared to what he would be as long as Glanton was alive, as long as Glanton was the leader. But now that Glanton's dead, it's like the judge is a rabid dog for the first time unchained. Everyone is afraid of him and what he might do, and it seems that Brown, even though he has guns and he knows the judge is unarmed, is scared making his way towards him. The next day, the kid and Tobin are kneeled down next to a river drinking water when suddenly a bullet skips off the water right next to the kid's face. He throws himself back on the ground and spins around to see that the bullet came from the judge, now wearing the clothing of both Toadvine and Brown and holding Brown's rifle. The judge is reloading as he's making his way towards them, and Tobin and the kid both scamper off into the brush next to the river, trying to hide. The scene that follows, I cannot do justice here. I highly recommend, again, if any of the story is interesting, you read this part for yourself. The judge is tramping through the brush, holding a rifle while looking for the kid and Tobin. And the kid, who's still injured from the arrow in his leg, can't stand up to run. So instead, he's crawling through the grass, hoping that the judge won't step on top of him, as the judge begins to yell and mock him. "Hello," called the judge, his voice off to the west, as if there were new riders to the creek and he addressed them. The kid lay listening. There were no new riders. After a while, the judge called out again. "Come out," he called. "There's plenty of water for everybody." The kid had swung the powder flask around to his back to keep it out of the creek, and he held the pistol up and waited. Upstream, the horses had stopped drinking. Then they started drinking again. When he moved out on the far side of the creek, he came upon the hand and foot tracks left by the ex-priest among the prints of the cats and foxes and the little desert pigs. As he crawls through the grass, he sees the horses stop and look at something, then look back down. He hears brush break in the other direction. Everything around him implies that the judge could be on top of him at any minute. Eventually, while crawling around, the kid finds Tobin's tracks and begins to follow them. When he catches up to Tobin, he sees that Tobin has used bones to construct a makeshift crucifix, thinking that perhaps the judge is the devil himself. Tobin stands up and holds the cross
Can't say I blame him.
up and begins yelling incantations at the judge. And as he does, the judge pulls out his rifle and shoots Tobin. He found Tobin kneeling in the creek, bathing his wound with a piece of linen torn from his shirt. The ball had passed completely through his neck. It had narrowly missed the carotid artery, yet he could not make the blood to stop. He looked at the kid, crouched among the skulls and upturned rib tines. "You've got to kill the horses," he said. "You've no other chance out of here. He'll ride you down." "We could take the horses." "Don't be a fool, lad. What other bait has he?" "We can get out as soon as it comes dark." "Do you think there'll be no day again?" The kid watched him. Will it not stop? He said. It will not. What do you think? I've got to stop it. The blood was running between his fingers. Where's the judge? Said the kid. Where indeed? If I kill him, we can take the horses. You'll not kill him. Don't be a fool. Shoot the horses. The kid looked off up the shallow sandy creek. Go on, lad. I like that mention of the line when the kid says they can leave it dark and the priest says, what, do you think it will never be day again? As long as there is a sun on the earth, the judge will hunt us down. So the kid sneaks his way around, finds the judge's horses, and kills them. As soon as he fires, he ducks back into the grass and begins to hide once more. Throw that gun out now, said the judge. He froze. The voice was not 50 feet away. I know what you've done. The priest put you up to it, and I'll take that as a mitigation in the act and the intent, which I would any man in his wrongdoing. But there's the question of property. You bring me the pistol now. The kid lay without moving. He heard the judge wade the creek upstream. He lay counting slowly under his breath. When the roiled water reached him, he stopped counting and let go on the current a dry twist of grass and told it away downstream. At the same count, it was scarcely out of sight among the bones. He moved out of the water and looked at the sun and began to make his way to where he'd left Tobin. You want to talk about a smart move? He heard way up the river that the judge walked through the water. And as soon as he heard him step into the water, he started counting for when the ripples of water got to him. At the same time, he reset the count and dropped grass on the water and counted to see how far it went in the same amount of time so he could have an idea for how far upriver the judge is. The kid makes it back to Tobin, and as the two of them are hiding, it says, while talking about the judge, he called out points of jurisprudence. He cited cases. He expounded upon those laws pertaining to property rights in beast mansuet, and he quoted from cases of attainder insofar as he reckoned them germane to the corruption of blood in the prior and felonious owners of horses now dead among the bones. Then he spoke of other things. The ex-priest leaned to the kid. Don't listen, he said. I ain't listening. Stop your ears. So now the judge is just stampering around in the grass talking about case law of dead horses and gun property and all kinds of stuff, just, I guess, trying to convince the kid that it's safe to come out. Eventually, at night, the two of them slip away, and they get into the open desert, and then, when they think they're safe, the judge and the fool show up again. Until the afternoon, Tobin and the kid hobble their way through the desert, and they're slowly running out of water, and between their injuries, they can't keep going much longer. It's at this time that the kid begins to notice that the wind's picking up, and the wind itself is covering their tracks in the sand, making it hard for the judge to track them, even though they can still see him out on the distant horizon. We gotta hide, he said. Hide? Yes. Where do you aim to hide? Here, we'll hide here. You can't hide, lad. We can hide. You think you can't follow your track? The wind's taking it. It's gone from the slope yonder. Gone. Ever trace. The ex-priest shook his head. Come on, we gotta get going. You can't hide. Get up. The ex-priest shook his head. Lad, he said. Get up, said the kid. Go on, go on. He waved his hand. There's, again, been several points in the story up until now where people have done the same thing to the kid. They continue to brush him off and say, oh, go on without me. And the kid never leaves him. But this time, the kid is getting tired of hearing people close to him tell him to leave them. So the kid spoke to him. He ain't nothing. You told me so yourself. Men are made of the dust of the earth. You said so. It was no parable? No parable. That it was a naked fact and the judge was a man like all men. Face him down then, said the ex-priest. Face him down if he is so. And him with the rifle and me with the pistol, him with 2 rifles. Get up from there. Tobin rose. He stood unsteadily. He leaned against the kid. They set out, veering off from the drifted track and down past the wagon. It's fulfilling that after so many times of the kid being told to leave and to save himself and him ignoring their request, and the kid's very short-winded through the story, he doesn't speak a lot, but here with Tobin, someone who he probably, arguably with Toadvine, cares about more than anyone else in the group, when Tobin tells the kid to leave him. The kid yells back and says, "He ain't nothing. The judge ain't nothing. It's not like one of your parables that you always tell me about. This is a true fact. The judge is made from dirt, and dirt can bleed." Whenever the judge comes up over the hillside into the little valley that Tobin and the kid are hiding in, it says that the judge, he has all his weapons and the clothing, but that he has made a small parasil out of bones and old hide. And he also has the idiot chained to a leather leash. So not only is he decked out with guns walking through the desert, but I guess on account of his, albino nature, he has a small umbrella to shield himself from the sun, and he has a crazed man on a leash like a dog. It's some, weirdly bizarro version of a woman with an umbrella walking her poodle during a day out shopping.
That's what I was thinking as well.
But it is this judge, this massive man, this monster, hunting down a child and an ex-priest. The judge and the idiot glance around them and then walk through the area. And after they leave, Tobin and the kid begin to discuss what they're even going to do now. As they're discussing going back to the creek, they look up and the judge is now walking back towards them. As the judge is walking through the area, he begins to yell, "That priest has led you to this, boy. I know you would not hide. I know, too, that you've not the heart of a common assassin. I've passed before your gun sights twice this hour, and will pass a third time. Why not show yourself?" "No assassin," called the judge, "and no partisan either. There's a flawed place in the fabric of your heart. Do you think I could not know? You alone were mutinous. You alone reserved in your soul some corner of clemency for the heathen." The imbecile stood and raised its hands to its face and yammered weirdly and sat again. "You think I've killed Brown and Toadvine? They are alive as you and me. They are alive and in possession of the fruits of their election. Do you understand? Ask the priest. The priest knows. The priest does not lie." The judge raised the parasol and adjusted his parcels. "Perhaps," he called, "perhaps you have seen this place in a dream, that you would die here." Then he descended the esker, passed once more across the boneyard led by the tethered fool, until the two were shimmering and insubstantial in the waves of the heat, and then they were gone altogether. I'm going to come back to that line the judge says about the kid being mutinous. I'll come back to that at the end of the story. But we have here for now is the judge is yelling. He says that Brown and Toadvine are still alive, and then he just continues to walk across the desert. So Tobin and the kid continue to wander across the desert into the night until at the point where they're ready to fall to the ground dead, they are saved by a group of Indians. They were members of the Diagino tribe, and they see these two people nearly dead on the floor of the desert and decide to bring them back into their homes. The Diagonis feed them and treat their wounds, and whenever they ask what happened to him, Tobin and the kid just say that it was the humus, and the members of the tribe simply nod and continue to take care of the two men. I don't think I have to say how profound this is, at least, in sense of the narrative, that both of these men made their living and became successful by hunting down and killing natives indiscriminately. And now their life is saved at the point of death by natives of the region. It also leans back on my theory for what the ending of this story is, but again, we're almost there. Eventually, Tobin and the kid make it to San Diego, and for the first time, the two of them step out to see the sea, something that the kid has never seen before. As the kid goes to see the sea, Tobin continues to work his way through the streets looking for a doctor. While the kid no longer has a shaft sticking out of his leg, the arrowhead is still inside of his thigh. After the kid's done looking at the ocean, he goes to a local tavern, and nearly as soon as he sits down, a group of police come to arrest him. The kid's thrown into jail, and he wakes up the next day, and who is standing outside of his jail other than the judge? The judge is wearing a nice linen coat, and it seems that he's been invited into the prison by one of the deputies of the prison itself. Looking down on the kid and smiling, the judge begins. "Well," he said, "how are you?" The kid didn't answer. "They wanted to know from me if you were always crazy," said the judge. They said it was the country. The country turned them out. Where's Tobin? I told them that the Cretan had been a respected doctor of divinity from Harvard College as recently as March of this year, that his wits had stood him as far west as the Aquarius Mountains. It was the ensuing country that carried them off, together with his clothes. And Toadvine and Brown, where are they? In the desert, where you left them. A cruel thing. Your companions in arms? The judge shook his head. What do they aim to do with me? I believe it is their intention to hang you. What did you tell them? Told them the truth, that you were the person responsible. Not that we have all the details, but they understand that it was you and none other who shaped events along such a calamitous course, eventuating in the massacre at the ford by the savages, with whom you conspired. Means and ends are of little moment here, idle speculations. But even though you carry the draft of your murderous plan with you to the grave, it will nonetheless be known in all its infamy to your Maker, and as that is so, so shall it be made known to the least of men, all in the fullness of time. You're the one that's crazy, said the kid. The judge smiled. No, he said, it was never me. But why lurk there in the shadows? Come here where we can talk, you and me. The kid stood against the far wall, hardly more than a shadow himself. Come up, said the judge. Come up, for I've yet more to tell you. He looked down the hallway. Don't be afraid, he said. I'll speak softly. It's not for the world's ears, but for yours only. Let me see you. Don't you know that I'd have loved you like a son? I haven't read that line since I thought about what the judge has been doing to kids through the whole story. Oh, that's so bad. Okay. All right. Sorry, I got cold everywhere. Just that line spoken about that. Anyway, okay. Sorry. He reached through the bars. Come here, he said. Let me touch you. Oh no, it gets worse. Oh, I haven't read this portion since I thought about what the judge does. Oh no. He says, I love you like a son, then says, let me touch you. After throwing his hands through the bars. Oh my gosh. Imagine the judge, this monster of a man. Okay. This story bothers me in so many different parts. This is one of them. The kid stood with his back to the wall. Come here if you're not afraid, whispered the judge. I ain't afraid of you. The judge smiled. He spoke softly into the dim mud cubicle. You came forward, he said, to take part in a work, but you were a witness against yourself. You said in judgment on your own deeds. You put your own allowances before the judgments of history, and you broke with the body of which you were pledged a part and poisoned it in all its enterprise. Hear me, man. I spoke in the desert for you and you only, and you turned a deaf ear to me. If war is not holy, man is nothing but antic clay. Even the Cretan acted in good faith according to his parts, for it was required of no man to give more than he possessed, nor was any man's share compared to another's. Only each was called upon to empty out his heart into the common, and one did not. Can you tell me who that one was? It was you, whispered the kid. You were the one. The judge watched him through the bars. He shook his head. What joins men together, he said, is not the sharing of bread, but the sharing of enemies. But if I was your enemy, with whom would you have shared me? With whom? The priest. Where is he now? Look at me. Our animosities were formed and waiting before ever we two met. Yet even so, you could have changed it all. You, said the kid, it was you. It was never me, said the judge. Listen to me. Do you think Glanton was a fool? Don't you know he'd have killed you? Lies, said the kid. Lies, by God, lies. Think again, said the judge. He never took part in your craziness. The judge smiled. He took his watch from his waistcoat and opened it and held it to the failing light. For even if you should have stood your ground, he said, yet what ground was it? He looked up. He pressed the case shut and restored the instrument to his person. Time to be going, he said. I have errands. So there are two ways to view that section. One of them is that the judge is crazy. And While that kind of may sound like a cop out, I do think there is some, maybe not evidence, but there's some weight that opinion has from the text. There's instances where the judge launches into diatribes that make sense to him but don't seem appropriate for the moment. Maybe he's so riddled with violence in his head that he kind of sees the world the way he thinks it should be rather than how it actually is. Or, in other words, he's not smart, he's just making stuff up. Which might be true in some part, but I don't really agree with. What I agree with more is this is the second emphasis on the judge's belief system. It's similar to in the desert when he called the kid mutinous. Here he's saying that the kid set out on something important, something of a higher calling: war, death, destruction, and that he turned his back on himself. By not committing fully to the gang, and I'll talk about what that means to me in a moment, but by not committing fully to the gang, he calls the kid a traitor, that everything that happened was his fault. The kid counters back and says, "You were the traitor, you were the one who sold us out," but the judge says that the kid betrayed himself, and therefore the rest of the gang. It also further lays on my theory that the judge planned everything out, because it says what the judge told the police to have the kids arrested is that the massacre at the Colorado River was done by the kid who conspired with the Yumas to kill everyone at the river that day. Now, if the Yuma attack was completely random, why would the judge come up with this story of there being an entire conspiracy? That must mean the police are looking for a conspiracy or planning in some regard, right? So I think the judge planned with the Yumas to kill everyone at the ferry and then just pinned everything on the kid. Over the next few days, the kid explains to the men in the jail where all the treasures that the Glanton gang had amassed are now located. The court, seeing that the kid is being honest and also realizing that he is a kid who was surrounded by much older, much more evil men, decided to just let the kid go. Eventually, the kid finds a doctor to remove the piece from his leg, and it says that during his dream while he's on the table and most other dreams he has after this, he thinks of the judge, the constant looming presence always in his mind. In June, while traveling through the city of Los Angeles, the kid sees a public hanging of two people. He's too far away from the hanging itself to see who they are or what they look like, but after they're hung, he comes back later that evening, and it's none other but Toadvine and David Brown. So it seems the judge was right. He didn't kill them out there in the woods. He maybe just beat them or tied them up or convinced them to give to the judge their clothing and weapons. But either way, the judge was right. He didn't kill him. Maybe the judge was also right about Tobin in saying that Tobin simply went mad and was now locked up in some sanitarium. It would explain why there at the end at the river, he builds a makeshift crucifix and holds it up and begins to yell at the judge. But I also kind of interpret that as Tobin making a distraction so that the kid could get a shot off. It depends on your interpretation, but perhaps the judge was right in saying Tobin was crazy, because here he was right about Toadvine and Brown not being killed in the desert. But again, nevertheless, they were killed here, and the last time the kid ever spoke to Toadvine was when he left him at that well sitting next to the judge. During this time, the kid seems to be destitute. He saw a boy who kind of looked like the idiot or the fool in a window of a house, so he runs to the room to see who it is, only to have the door opened and see that it's some other unrelated fool, and the kid walks off defeated. He asks about the priest and Tobin until he eventually quits and decides there's going to be no way he can find him, and Tobin's never mentioned again. With his last $2, he goes to the coroner and buys the necklace of ears that was hanging on David Brown whenever he was hung. These ears passed from Bath Cat to Dave Brown and now to the kid. So from here, the kid grows and eventually becomes the man. By the time he's 28 years old, he's been working odd jobs for years throughout California and the American West. Everything from cattle farmers to factory workers to port workers. It seems that as he gets older, the kid has decided to change his life, at least in small ways. He never learned to read, but regardless, it says that the kid begins to carry a Bible. He begins to take jobs escorting people through the American West who otherwise would be completely unprotected to do so. One day, while out on one of these journeys, he sees an entire parade of people who have just been massacred. There are bodies and blood all across the desert, something that he's very familiar with. But what the man, previously the kid, does now that he wouldn't have done back then is in the midst of all of this blood and bodies, he sees an old woman curled up underneath a rock. He made his way among the corpses and stood before her. She was very old, and her face was gray and leathery, and sand had collected in the folds of her clothing. She did not look up. The shawl that covered her head was much faded of its color, yet it bore like a pattern woven into the fabric the figures of stars and quarter moons and other insignia of a province unknown to him. He spoke to her in a low voice. He told her that he was an American, and that he was a long way from the country of his birth, and that he had no family, and that he had traveled much and seen many things, and had been at war and endured hardships. He told her that he would convey her to a safe place, some party of her country people who would welcome her, and that she should join them, for he could not leave her in this place, or she would surely die. He knelt on one knee, resting the rifle before him like a staff. Abuelita, he said. He reached into the little cove and touched her arm. She moved slightly, her whole body light and rigid. She weighed nothing. She was just a dried shell, and she had been dead in that place for years. This is so much different from what the kid was, what any member of the Glanton gang was. He's now more of the stereotypical cowboy, the hero, who's looking for people who need his help across the American West. And he sees this woman who he thinks to be alone, and he walks to her and starts empathizing. He talks about how he's a man who has lost his country and lost his way, but that he's a fighter, that he knows how to come out of it, and he's going to do whatever it takes to keep her safe. And when he reaches out and touches her, she is the bones of something that once existed, but is now no more. Or in other words, the kid seems to be too late. The kid has conversations with buffalo hunters, which is symbolic as both of them had a habit of hunting a thing nearly out of existence. One night, while out in a valley, he's approached by a group of young men who are also out in the wilderness. They sit around the fire with the man and begin to talk, and eventually, the man shows the group his collection of ears that again he got off of David Brown. One of the boys in the group, a boy named Elrod, says that the man's a liar. And with everything the man says about his past, Elrod continuously says that he's a liar. Eventually, the man stops and says, "You ain't calling me a liar, are you, son?" "I ain't your son." "How old are you?" "That's some more of your business." "How old are you?" "He's 15. "You hush your damn mouth." He turned to the man. "He don't speak for me," he said. "He's done spoke. I was 15 years old when I was first shot. I ain't never been shot. You ain't 16 yet, neither." Again, the kid now called the man. Just his matter-of-fact statements. "I was your age when I got shot." "Well, I haven't been shot." "Oh, you want to fix that?" "You ain't 16 yet, neither. You aim to shoot me? I aim to try to keep from it." "Come on, Elrod." "You ain't going to shoot nobody. Maybe in the back or them asleep." "Elrod, we're gone. I knowed you for what you was when I seen you. You better go on. Sit there and talk about shooting somebody. They ain't nobody done it yet." The other four stood at the limits of the firelight. The youngest of them was casting glances out at the dark sanctuary of the prairie night. "Go on," the man said. "They're waiting on you." He spat into the man's fire and wiped his mouth. That night, whenever the man goes to sleep, he's awoken by the 15-year-old boy standing over his bed, ready to shoot him with a rifle. The man rolls out of bed and pulls his revolver and aims it at the kid and says, "You wouldn't have lived anyway," before he pulls the trigger. The next day, the boy's friends come up and take his body away, and the man sits there and watches as the 15-year-old's much younger brother looks at him and looks back at his dead brother and then walks him off the trail. There is an intense nihilism about this scene, at least to me. Other people interpret it differently, but whenever I first read this, it's like, at the beginning of the story, the man who was then the kid was in this exact position. He was young, dumb, and violent. Like he said there, I took my first bullet when I was 15 at the riverboat in Louisiana. And there's something narratively, like obviously I understand why logistically the man shot the kid, or the man shot the boy, because the boy was about to shoot him. Like, it makes sense. But there's something so narratively dark about it that That kid was in the exact same position I was once in, and I got better. But this kid doesn't get that chance, and he fires. Specifically with the phrase he uses, where he says, "You wouldn't have lived anyway." What a way to look back on effectively a figure, a representation of yourself. So one night after this, the man is riding along the Brazos River, and he decides to stop in a bar that is hosting some kind of entertainment. Whenever the man steps into the bar, he sees that this entertainment is a dancing bear. A bear that is wearing a suit, and it is doing a dance as a small girl spins a music box for the bear to dance to. As the man walks in and sits down at the bar, he looks into the mirror behind the barman, and who else does he see on the other side of the restaurant except for the judge? The judge is staring back at him through that mirror, and for a moment his blood runs cold as this man he's feared for years and years, perhaps even convinced himself it was part of some bad dream, is now right there in the reflection. As this is happening, the showman who is presenting the bear to everyone is walking through the crowd taking donations and gets into a fight with one of the bar patrons. In response, the bar patron pulls his pistol and shoots the bear dead on stage. As the man is watching this, the little girl stops playing the music box and begins to cry over the dead bear, saying, "It's all over, it's all over." "Do you believe it's all over, son?" He turned. The judge was standing at the bar looking down at him. He smiled. He removed his hat. The great pale dome of his skull shone like an enormous phosphorant egg in the lamplight. "The last of the true, the last of the true. I'd say they're all gone under now, saving me and thee, would you not?" He tried to see past him. The great corpus enshadowed him from all beyond. He could hear the woman announcing the commencement of dancing in the hall to the rear. "And some are not yet born who shall have cause to curse the dauphin soul," said the judge. He turned slightly. "Plenty of time for the dance." "I ain't studying no dance." The judge smiled. The judge continues to make the man uncomfortable. He leans over the bar, now unattended, and stills a bottle and begins drinking. The man says, "I gotta go." The judge looked aggrieved. "Go," he said. He nodded. He reached and took hold of his hat where it lay on the bar, but he did not take it up and he did not move. "What man would not be a dancer if he could?" said the judge. "It's a great thing, the dance." "Drink up," he said, "drink up. This night thy soul may be required of thee." Oh, these lines. Oh, they're so brutal when you know where this goes. Okay. I'm sorry I keep freaking out over it. It's a good book. Anyway, he looked at the glass. The judge smiled and gestured with the bottle. He took up the glass and drank. The judge watched him. "Was it always your idea," he said, "that if you do not speak, you would not be recognized?" "You've seen me." The judge ignored this. "I recognized you when I first saw you, and yet you were a disappointment to me, then and now. Even so, at the last, I find you here with me. I ain't with you." The judge raised his bald brow. "Not?" he said. He looked about him in a puzzled and artful way, and he was a passable thespian. "I never come here hunting you." "What then?" said the judge. "What would I want with you? I come here same reason as any man." "And what reason is that?" "What reason is what?" "That these men are here. They come here to have a good time." The judge watched him. He began to point out various men in the room and to ask if these men were here for a good time or if indeed they knew why they were here at all. "Everybody don't have to have a reason to be someplace." "That's so," said the judge. "They do not have to have a reason. But order is not set aside because of their indifference." The judge turns to the room and says, "This is an orchestration for an event. For a dance, in fact. The participants will be apprised of their roles at the proper time. For now, it is enough that they have arrived. As the dance is the thing with which we are concerned and contains complete within itself its own arrangement and history and finale, there is no necessity that the dancers contain these things within themselves as well. In any event, the history of all is not the history of each, nor indeed the sum of those histories, and none here can finally comprehend the reason for his presence, for he has no way of knowing even in what the event consists. In fact, Were he to know, he might well absent himself, and you can see that he cannot be any part of the plan if plan there be. He smiled, his great teeth shone, he drank. An event, a ceremony, the orchestration thereof, the overture carries certain marks of decisiveness. It includes the slaying of a large bear. The evening's progress will not appear strange or unusual, even to those who question the rightness of the event so ordered. A ceremony, then. One could well argue that there are not categories of no ceremony, but only ceremonies of greater or lesser degree, and deferring to this argument, we will say that this is a ceremony of a certain magnitude, perhaps more commonly called a ritual. A ritual includes the letting of blood. Rituals which fail in this requirement are but mock rituals. Here, every man knows the false at once. Never doubt it. That feeling in the breast that evokes a child's memory of loneliness, such as when the others have gone and only the game is left with its solitary participant. A solitary game without an opponent. Where only the rules are at hazard. Don't look away, we are not speaking in mysteries. You of all men are no stranger to that feeling, the emptiness and the despair. It is that which we take arms against, is it not? Is not blood the tempering agent in the mortar which bonds? The judge leaned closer. What do you think death is, man? Of whom do we speak when we speak of a man who was and is not? Are these blind riddles, or are they not some part of every man's jurisdiction? What is death if not an agency? And whom does he intend toward? The judge is saying that they are here for this dance. The people who are a part of this event are there for this dance. And no one knows what the dance will entail whenever they step into it. No one knows what the ritual is going to be, but they know that they are a part of it. And that's all that they can know. When the men here showed up for a dance, they did not know that a slaying of the bear would be on the itinerary, but they did show up for a dance, and anything that dance may contain. Their place at the table was set before they even knew what was going to be served. A man seeks his own destiny and no other, said the judge, will or nil. Any man who could discover his own fate and elect therefore some opposite course could only come at last to that self-same reckoning at the same appointed time, for each man's destiny is as large as the world he inhabits and contains within it all opposites as well. This desert upon which so many have been broken is vast and calls for largeness of heart, but it is also ultimately empty. It is hard, it is barren. Its very nature is stone. He poured the tumbler full. Drink up, he said. The world goes on. We have dancing nightly, and this night is no exception. The straight and the winding way are one, and now that you are here, what do the years count since last we two met together? Men's memories are uncertain, and the past that was differs little from the past that was not. He took up the tumbler, and the judge had poured, and he drank and set it down again. He looked at the judge. I've been everywhere, he said. This is just one more place. The judge arched his brow. Did you post witnesses, he said, to report to you on the continuing existence of those places once you quit them? That's crazy. It is? Where is yesterday? Where is Glanton and Brown? Where's the priest? He leaned closer. Where's Shelby, whom you left to the mercies of Elias in the desert? And where is Tate, whom you abandoned in the mountains? Where are the ladies? Ah, the fair and tender ladies with whom you danced at the governor's ball when you were a hero anointed with the blood of the enemies of the republic you elected to defend. And where is the fiddler? And where's the dance? I guess you can tell me. I tell you this, as war becomes dishonored and its nobility called into question, those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will the dance become a false dance, and the dancers false dancers. And yet there will be one there always who is a true dancer, and can you guess who that might be? You ain't nothing. You speak truer than you know, but I will tell you, only that man who has offered up himself entire to the blood of war, who has been to to the floor of the pit and seen horror in the round and learned at last that it speaks to his inmost heart, only that man can dance. Even a dumb animal can dance. The judge set the bottle on the bar. Hear me, man, he said. There is room on the stage for one beast and one alone. All others are destined for a night that is eternal and without name. One by one, they will step down into the darkness before the footlamps. Bears that dance, bears that don't. The kid gets up to leave, and he tries to take his mind off of this. He walks into the back room of the saloon where there is a brothel. And he quickly goes with the first woman who walks up to him, and he goes and spends his time in the brothel. And after it's over, the woman tells him that he can't stay in this room anymore because they need to keep using these rooms. And she tells the man to get out. And the man kind of sits there for a minute. It's like he's afraid. It's like he's afraid of whatever's coming next. And he's sitting there on the bed, looking out the window. And eventually he swings his legs over the edge and gets up and goes back downstairs. And then it says when he gets to the bottom, he stood at the edge of the dance floor. A ring of people had taken the floor and were holding hands and grinning and calling out to one another. A fiddler sat on a stool on a stage, and a man walked up and down, calling out the order of the dance and gesturing and stepping in the way he wished them to go. Outside of the darkened lot, groups of wretched Tonkawas stood in the mud with their face composed in strange lost portraits within the sash work of the window lights. The fiddler rose and set the fiddle to his jaw. There was a shout and the music began, and the ring of dancers began to rotate ponderously with a great shuffling. He went out the back. So, this moment where the kid is trying to take his mind off everything the judge has said, and he is now standing there before the dance floor, ready to dance, and the kid decides to leave. It says, the rain had stopped and the air was cold. He stood in the yard. Stars were falling across the sky, myriad and random. This is a callback to the beginning of the book when his father would tell him that the night he was born, how the stars did fall. Speeding along brief vectors from their origins in night to their destinies in dust and nothingness. Within the hall, the fiddle squealed and the dancers shuffled and stomped. In the street, men were calling for the little girl whose bear was dead, for she was lost. They went among the darkened lots with lanterns and torches calling out to her. Again, the judge is in town, so it seems another young child has gone missing. He went down the walkboard towards the jakes. Again, jakes are effectively outhouses. He stood outside, listening to the voices fading away, and he looked again at the silent tracks of the stars where they died over the darkened hills. Then he opened the rough board door of the jakes and stepped in. The judge was seated upon the closet. He was naked, and he rose up smiling and gathered him in his arms against his immense and terrible flesh and shot the wooden bar latch home behind him. In the saloon, two men who wanted to buy the hide were looking for the owner of the bear. The bear lay on the stage in an immense pool of blood. All the candles had gone out save one, and it guttered uneasily in its grease like a votive lamp. In the dance hall, a young man had joined the fiddler, and he kept the measure of the music with a pair of spoons which he clapped between his knees. The horse, a shade half naked, some with their breast exposed. In the mudded dog yard behind the premises, two men went down the boards towards the jakes. A third man was standing there urinating into the mud. Is someone in there? The first man said. The man who was relieving himself did not look up. I wouldn't go in there if I was you, he said. Is there somebody in there? I wouldn't go in. He hitched himself up and buttoned his trousers and stepped past them and went up the walk towards the lights. The first man watched him go and then opened the door of the jakes. Good God Almighty, he said. What is it? He didn't answer. He stepped past the other and went back up the walk. The other man stood looking after him, Then he opened the door and looked in. In the saloon, they had rolled the dead bear onto a wagon sheet, and there was a general call for hands. In the anteroom, the tobacco smoke circled the lamps like an evil fog, and the men bid and dealt in a low mutter. There was a lull in the dancing, and a second fiddler took the stage, and the two plucked their strings and turned the little hardwood pegs until they were satisfied. Many among the dancers were staggering drunk through the room, and some had rid themselves of shirts and jackets and stood bare-chested and sweating, even though the room was cold enough to cloud their breath. An enormous whore stood clapping her hands at the bandstand and calling drunkenly for the music. She wore nothing but a pair of men's drawers, and some of her sisters were likewise clad in what appeared to be trophies, hats or pantaloons or blue twill cavalry jackets. As the music sawed up, there was a lively cry from all, and a caller stood to the front and called out the dance, and the dancers stomped and hooted and lurched against one another. And they are dancing. The board floor slamming under the jackboots, and the fiddlers grinning hideously over the cannon pieces. Towering over them all is the judge, and he is naked, dancing, his feet lively and quick, and now in double time and bowing to the ladies, huge and pale and hairless, like an enormous infant. He never sleeps, he says. He says he'll never die. He bows to the fiddlers and shaves backwards and throws back his head and laughs deep in his throat, and he is a great favorite, the judge. He wafts his hat, and the lunar dome of his skull passes palely under the lamps, and he swigs about and takes possession of one of the fiddles, and he parays and makes a pass, two passes, dancing and fiddling at once. His feet are light and nimble. He never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in light and in shadow, and he is a great favorite. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. The end. And that is the novel, Blood Meridian. So, what was that ending? I am going to go ahead and ruin the game for you now. I'm not going to be the final authority on what all of that means. I'm pretty confident in what happened, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be the expert in the symbolism or the themes of it, but I have a pretty good idea. So to get it out of the way, what logistically happened is in the midst of all of this, the bear dying on stage and the men wanting to scavenge its body for a pelt, and the dance continuing to amp up, and the people dancing and the judge joining them. In the midst of that, the man who was once the kid steps out of the brothel, and he chooses not to dance, and instead he goes out back to go use an outhouse, and oh man, the visual is so terrifying. As he opens the outhouse door and steps in, the judge is standing in there completely naked, and we never are told what the kid looked like or exactly what the judge did to him, but it's enough that whenever the men open the outhouse, all that they can say is, "Good God Almighty." The kid was horrifically murdered by the judge. We saw in one instance earlier that in a split second, the judge crushed a man's skull with his bare hands, so imagine what he could do if given time. And not to belabor the point, but I think it's pretty clear that considering the judge was a horrific and prolific child predator, and the man was a child that he had preyed on for quite some time, you can use your worst parts of imagination to determine what he might have done to the man. And the story ends with the room dancing and the judge dancing above all of them, screaming of how he never sleeps and he will never die and he'll dance forever. So what does all that mean? So while we're talking about this story, let's go ahead and get the big detail out of the way. This is not something that is original to me at all. This is probably the first analysis most people make of the story. And that is, Judge Holden, at least symbolically, is the devil. Not only with the symbolism I mentioned earlier, like the tale of him making gunpowder being a reference back to Paradise Lost, but also in other details, like the judge is never seen sleeping, and he's also never seen eating or drinking, at least not directly mentioned. He is known for dancing and specifically for playing the fiddle, which what religious figure is famous for playing the fiddle? His appearance to the Glanton gang was almost supernatural, just appearing in the middle of the desert and then acting as their escort. Not only that, but his appearance that he had at the beginning of the novel with the kid, and then Tobin going on to say that everyone says they've seen the judge at some point before this. The first thing said of the judge directly in the entire book is when the Reverend Green looks at him and yells, "This is him," cried the Reverend, sobbing. "This is him, the devil. Here he stands." I mean, the rifle he uses to shoot people is named after death. The whole "In Arcadia, there I am." He literally uses the gun of death to kill whoever he doesn't like. And of course, that combined with his conversations of selfishness, of how the freedom of the birds is an insult to him, and if creation exists without his knowledge, it exists without his consent. It sounds like a jealous angel who once wished to be God. His appearance itself is even snake-like. He's hairless with this pale white skin and these snake eyes, or pig eyes as they're described somewhere else in the story. He seems to have near infinite knowledge of different languages and cultures and politics, as if he has lived a much longer life than his current form suggests. Even at the end of the story, there's no mention of him having aged at all, despite it being decades since they last met. And there's also, of course, his philosophy regarding war, and that war and death is the ultimate merit of a man, as well as a slew of short mentions of Bible verses he quotes, or things and language that ties him into God. As a matter of fact, whenever Tobin is telling the story about the judge taking them to the volcano to make the gunpowder, he describes the volcano as being something out of Dante's Inferno, further implying that the judge is quite literally taking the gang through hell. Now, do I think that it was always McCarthy's point to have the judge be the actual literal Satan in the story? No, I just think that's what the thematic element is. That's what the judge feels like. He feels like an embodiment of the devil. I don't think the purpose of the story was that there was an explicitly supernatural element in the midst of this historical horror. What would you categorize this as? It's definitely horrific, probably just historical fiction, but very dark historical fiction. He didn't just throw the devil into the middle of that. But Judge Holden is definitely the proxy of the devil. He is the agent of evil in the story. And I say all that to say, for one, I think it's interesting that Judge Holden holds so many characteristics in line with the devil, but also, if you get to the end of the story and you read that the judge murders the kid, or the judge murders the man, and your thought is, oh, that's annoying, why didn't the judge get what he deserves? I think you're missing the point. And if you watching the video right now felt that way, I'm going to assume that's not your fault and probably my bad in telling you the story, because it's very different between reading a book and then however I've done trying to regurgitate that information anyway. Because that would be like getting to the end of a story and then hearing that death killed someone and then being frustrated that death didn't get what death deserves. Judge Holden is not so much a character and not so much someone that goes on a journey as much as he is an element within the piece. He is not a thing that might be, he is a thing that is. He is a collection of things that are, of the horrors and the brutality that can exist within the world, and the mindsets that some people can have that create these ultimate situations of brutality, like Blood Meridian said in. It's like getting mad at an act of nature for taking someone's life. It just doesn't make sense. So whenever we apply it that way, we see Judge Holden as this essence rather than a person, then instead of asking, what does the kid's death say about the judge? The question is, what does the kid's death say about the kid? Now, I also want to emphasize, in all of McCarthy's stories, there is very, very rarely a moral message or a definitive, this is good guy, this is bad guy. Every now and then you'll get one, like The Road had a few, and that book's also a lot easier to read because of that. But Blood Meridian isn't a story of good people and bad people. It is entirely people who are predominantly bad, but occasionally show moments of good. And I think we can all agree that the closest to a good character we have within this story is the kid. And I think that while the judge was evil, I don't think he was crazy. And I think within the rules of the world they inhabited, a lot of what he said made sense. Like, of course, his whole speech about war being the only virtue that matters and men should fight and kill each other. Of course, that's evil and barbaric to us, but he's saying that to a group of people who cut off people's scalps to make money. Of course, that would be the rule that would abide by them, even if they don't like to hear it. So, again, this is very much so up for interpretation. If you enjoyed the story and just wanted to hear the story and don't care about my opinions on it, then thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. But whenever I first read it, and as I read the story over and over and listened to lectures about it, and read reviews about this book or analysis of this book, I continued to reaffirm my initial ideas with what that ending means. In that final conversation that the judge has with the kid, I know he's called the man, but I'm going to keep calling him the kid for consistency's sake. In that final conversation, he talks about how the dance, as he calls it, which is a metaphor for, you could say life, warfare, events, whatever, moments in time or all of time itself. In this dance, every participant who steps into that dance does not know what will happen. He equates it to the moment they're in. The people who came here for a dance didn't know that a bear was going to be shot. But he explains that if any one member of the dance knew what his fate would be, it would ruin the dance entirely, because that one person could change the course of everyone else's destinies. So a dance only works, it is only fitting if everyone doesn't know what will happen when they step into their role. And as a matter of fact, the only choice that people have, and this lies back on the themes the story has constantly brought up, of faith, destiny, free will, the only choice, according to the judge, that people have is if they dance or they don't dance. We're all going to step into that quiet night, as the judge says. Bears who dance and bears who don't. Fate and free will comes up a ton throughout this story. Again, unless you think of the judge as a fully supernatural character, which I don't think he is, then there were several fateful meetings of the judge throughout the kid's life. Like, again, whenever he was in Nacogdoches and he saw him at the Reverend's revival. But also, like the little moments, whenever the kid goes to draw the arrow to see if he'll put down one of the injured comrades, the judge looks at him and stares him down. And if it hadn't been for the judge staring him down, which caused him to pick a different arrow, which caused him to stay behind, which caused him to get stuck with tape, which caused him to go up onto the mountain, and everything that followed after that, which eventually came out that the kid wasn't there when the gunfight with the Mexican soldiers began, which might have gotten him killed. All of that came from the judge making eye contact with him and the kid choosing a different arrow. So there's so many moments of fate like that that occur throughout the story. And again, as the judge said, if any of those moments were known by the kid going in, he could have changed them, and fate for everyone could have gone completely differently. So if fate is to be real, and if the judge analysis of it at the end is true, then that means the only choice this kid has in his life is if he participates in what fate has for him or not. If he dances or if he doesn't. And this is kind of subjective, like even more so than an analysis. See, whenever, I kind of mentioned this earlier, I said the hardest part to adapt of this entire story, if you were adapted into the film, is the kid's level of participation in everything that's happening. Because if you have the kid just murdering people, doing the exact same with the rest of the gang, then he's no different. But like I said earlier, the kid is never mentioned explicitly in these moments of violence. He's just present. That's as far as the story will definitively say. So this kind of changes depending on what version of the kid you have in your mind. But because of what the judge says at the end of the story, a few times when he's in the jail cell and whenever they're in the desert, when he calls him mutinous against the cause, and when he also says that the kid has betrayed himself, that leads me to believe that the kid never fully went along with what the gang was doing. Sure, he'd fight back against Apaches who fired on him first and Mexican soldiers who fired on him first, but it makes me feel like the kid was never a part of the slaughter of unarmed civilians. And because of that, fate, God, whatever element you want to think is orchestrating this story, began to set him apart. It began to provide him with a way out. If you think about it, several times, whenever he was walking with the band of American soldiers in the beginning of the story, to again that mention of Tate on top of the snowy mountaintop whenever he wins the draw with the Mexican soldier. And time again, fate has instrumented everything to keep the kid alive. And it seems that the greatest moment of instrumentation was immediately after he showed his most successive acts of kindness. He stays behind and decides not to kill Shelby whenever they're being chased by the Mexican army, and then leaves him water from his own canteen. Then, whenever he gets to Tate further up the road, he decides instead of going on and saving himself to stay behind and help Tate as well. It is after that, after they get stranded on top of the mountain and the kid begins to run, and I know I mentioned it earlier, but this is why it sticks with me. The kid comes to the burning tree, the metaphorical voice of God standing before him. He stands among it with the spiders and the snakes, who are all equal to him in this moment, or I should say he's equal to them. And as he stands there, he sees this and he gathers warmth for it. It is another moment of fate providing for him, keeping him alive. And I think it is the most, until the end of the story, it is the most direct example of the world telling the kid to get out, to do something different. But instead, the kid goes back to the group. He goes back to the group of people who had to burn the scalps because they don't have any use for him anymore. And eventually would just take over a ferry and decide to rob and kill because they've got nothing else to do. Even that moment with Tobin and the kid hobbling across the desert and the wind begins to pick up and covers up the tracks behind them so that the judge can't find them. Time and time again, the world has moved mountains to save this boy's life. And I think the final moment happens there in that last chapter of the book. The final chance the world is giving him. We already see that he's trying to be better. The notion that he carries a Bible that he can't even read, or he goes to the old woman who's actually dead but he thinks is alive and talks of how he'll do everything he can to save her. We see these moments of someone who wants to do better, someone who is trying so desperately to be good. And the killing of the 15-year-old, that can go both ways. And honestly, I'm not smart enough and don't have opinions that strong one way or the other. Some people think that killing the kid is a good thing because it shows a severance from what the kid once was. And some people think that it's a bad thing. Like I mentioned earlier, I had on my first reading where I saw it as kind of an act of nihilism, of betterment over your past self in a bad way. I'll leave that up to you. Like I said, I don't feel that strongly one way or the other. But what I do feel strongly about is that moment after the conversation with the judge. After the kid and the judge meet in that saloon, and after the kid leaves him to go to the brothel, and then when he comes back down, he is standing in front of the stage, and there are two options. He can dance, or he can walk away. And the kid chooses to walk away. Now, this kind of depends on how you interpret the idea of dance, or at least as the judge puts it forward. When I read it, I see the dance as being the proliferation, the doing something with your life. It is a neutral act because it can be used for good or evil. You can be like the judge and dance, and by dance, the judge means wage war and kill as many people as you can, or you can be like what the kid started to be, helping others, trying to be a hero, something in spite of the world that falls apart around him, being something greater than the makings that you were supposed to be, or as the world originally had you to be, rising to the occasion. Both are equally a dance. It's just if you choose to dance or not. Again, as the judge said, our fates are set out from us for the beginning. None of us can control them. We can only choose if we participate or not. And I think there was a higher calling for the kid. I think that from the burning tree in the middle of the woods, or the multiple times he was saved, I think so badly that the universe had something great for this kid. Perhaps even a hero, dare I say, to rise up in this broken world and to make something of himself and to make something of the people around him. And in that moment, the world presented him the stage. He can dance, he can rise to the occasion, or as the judge says, did you think that if you never said anything, no one would recognize what you are? He can continue to be afraid of what the world might be, continue to think that he's not worth it or he doesn't deserve it, and he can walk out the back door. And here in this moment, the the kid walks out the back door. And in that moment where the judge kills him, I don't see it as a man killing the boy. I see it as death itself, or the world itself, destroying something that had so much potential to be so great and is now eaten up and chewed up by the sands of the desert, just like everything else. I think that the final moments of the story are saying that there will be those like the judge, those who continue to dance. In spite of what we do, at the end of the story, the judge was dancing. He'll never get old, he'll never die, and he'll never sleep. Evil will always be there. Monsters will always be in the dark. The most evil and depraved of humanity will continue to thrive in spite of us. And the only way that that can be kept from happening, the only way the judge is kept from winning, is good men deciding to dance. Good men deciding to rise to the occasion, to not shy away from what the world has to offer them or what they have to offer the world, and instead to make something of themselves, to be something greater, or to be consumed by the evil men who do choose to dance. Bears who dance and bears who don't. I see the story of Blood Meridian of being about the tragedy of not only the Old West and of America, but of humanity itself. There will always be evil. In the beginning of the story, the hermit talked about how man can make a machine, and a machine to perpetuate evil for 1,000 years. Evil will always exist. The changing factor is when good people, who in spite of the evil around them, like the kid, step up to the plate and decide to dance for themselves. And that's why I think the ending of the story is a tragedy, not because the kid died, but because he decided not to dance. And because of that, what future did he have but death? It's a very brutal story, it's a bloody story, but every aspect of it, from the blood and gore to the beautiful imagery, the scenery, the characters, the hate, it all goes to paint the picture of how morbid and evil the world is, and how desperate it is for a hero who decides to dance. And that is why I love Blood Meridian and love Cormac McCarthy. I'm not going to spoil, I was going to talk about the epilogue. It's like a paragraph and my theory with it, but it's even more fun if I tell you to go read the epilogue for yourself online, and good luck with that, because it's a doozy. But if you watch this long into a video of me explaining this novel from 1985 that I think is really cool, then I just want to say you're really cool for being here, and that means the most, and I just want to say thank you for watching. Normally at the end of these videos, I like to ramble, but I have been filming this for a total of like 10 or 11 hours at this point, and I'm really tired and need to get it edited, so I won't ramble for that long. I will say thank you all so much for watching. As you can see, this book really did mean a lot to me, and hopefully I was able to convey that over to you guys. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope this wasn't boring. If you stuck around this long, you're great. This is way too long. Hopefully the green screen goes well. We'll see how it turns out. Maybe I'll use it again. Maybe I'll burn it. Just depends on how you all like it. But for real, thank you all for being here. It means the world. So with that, I think we'll be done. I will say, World of Tanks. Remember to download World of Tanks. It is a fun game.
I had completely forgotten about that sponsorship.
The people I worked with were very kind and respectful to me, and they're great guys, and they make a great product. So go get World of Tanks, download that at the link in the description. But other than that, that should do it. So I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!
Well, I gotta say that show was was quite disturbing. Though I gotta say I did enjoy. I ate a bit, a little. I kind of liked what Wendigoon said at the end there. Okay. 2 hours. Oh man, this video is 2 hours long. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Anyway, I hope you had a happy Halloween. And without further ado, bye and good night. Oh, and also, if you want to see more videos of mine, you can subscribe, hit the bell so you're notified for future uploads. It was nice. Just have a good day.